Dad noises.
Robots in disguise. We on?
6 days ago? That's not a new notification.
Yes. Yep, we're on.
Ooh, yay. Waiting for 1 second, then it's gonna pop up. There we are.
There it is. Oh, boom. Boom.
That one's always
Hey,
pretty fun.
Alex Inman, good job being first.
Yeah.
And we are almost on time, guys, like we always are every
Just
single
like
week.
my wife.
What?
She's always first.
Welcome, everybody, to the Genus Brewing live stream. You can see our man on the chair put up our Genus Brewing bingo. So those of you guys who would like to play along, we'll probably mention that a couple other times, but there's the card. Good morning, everybody. Let's go over some Genus Brewing news real quick while we wait for people to log on. First of all, Garland Brewworks won Best New Brewery in the Inlander this year, which is important because we're introducing Adam Boyd, who is the brewer for Garland Brewworks.
Yay.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Here, live in the flesh. Yeah. So, person just got awarded something and he's here on the show.
Look at that.
That's how cool we are.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Garland Brewworks and kind of what you guys focus on over there?
Sure. Yeah, so we are a pretty new brewery. We opened up in July of last year. We're up in the Garland neighborhood in North Spokane, kind of a little historic neighborhood, little eclectic strip of local businesses up there, from coffee shops to record stores to the independently owned and historic movie theater, the Garland Theater there, and now a brewery.
Yeah.
We're a little 5-barrel brew house and a tap room and a small restaurant. And we focus on a gamut of beers, but anything from juicy, hazy IPAs to fruited sours to German-inspired lagers. So
Some of which we might even get to taste today.
yeah, I
Maybe.
brought a little to share.
Yeah.
Nice.
I didn't actually realize you were on a 5-barrel system.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
It's
fair.
bigger than ours. We need to borrow it.
I mean, bigger than some of ours.
Yeah.
That's not all of ours.
That's true.
I say it's Boyd-sized. It's perfect for me and for my size. I was previously brewing at Iron Goat Brewing in downtown Spokane. They had a 15-barrel brew house, so it's a little downsized from my past, but it works out great for me. So
turnover on that's pretty good. Do you guys go through beers pretty quick?
we do. I'm usually brewing about at least 2 times a week.
Nice.
And so we have a distribution deal with King Beverage. So what doesn't go through the tap room goes out the door to them. So,
Nice. Oh, we're gonna have to hook up with my King Beverage rep because we got a bunch of King Beverage shells that I need to get rid of. And we're
Oh,
also
yeah.
missing some beers, and
There
so
you
I'm
go.
going to get some Garland Brewworks on.
Do you have any IPAs with them right now?
Yes, our OG IPA, which is what you're holding in your hand right now.
Look at the taste and decide.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Nice.
Jiangyakyo, thank you so much for the super chat. We appreciate that. Support already. It's awesome.
That's what I appreciate about you.
That is what I appreciate about you. Valley Cup is underway. Valley Cup we talked about last week, but you should go check that out. Basically, it's a scorecard, our version of the Lester Cup, that every time that you go to one of the 8 participating breweries, you can get their Valley Cup submission, which is session-style beers. And then after you get all 8, you can vote for Genus Brewing. And then if you vote for us enough, then we will get to win, and then we will pick the next style.
Which we might just let you guys pick the next style.
Hey, there we
That
go.
could be actually really fun and on brand.
A little bit of audience participation.
Yeah.
Not too shabby.
Not too shabby. Why is that? Oh, it's not playing.
Jimmy J, if you're on, which you might be on a little bit later, but if you're not on.
He's right there. He just said morning, fellas.
Oh, perfect.
Hi, Jimmy.
Look at that. He was the homebrew winner at Inland Ale Works, and they have their beer release at noon today.
Yep.
Sweet.
So that's where I'm driving after this.
So anybody in Spokane can go try a beer that he got to make with the Inland Ale Works, and that is Chini, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I actually got a chance to try the beer that he submitted, and it was very nice. It's a kind of a light smoked jalapeno
Oh, nice.
beer.
I remember him talking about that with the when we did the pepper beer one.
Yeah, it turned out really nice. All the flavors really melded together. So I hope it's a good release for you, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Jimmy, that actually sounds absolutely wonderful, and I might steal partially that idea. Maybe not jalapenos, but I might steal a little bit of that oak smoked wheat, like.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
With something. Maybe,
Matt, man in the chair, while you're out at Chini, if I don't make it out there, but because also it's really far
Get us
away, you
some.
should, bring us back.
Bring us beer, Matt.
You've got homework.
Here, there's a little bit left, and you got a little extra head.
Yeah, this is
I know how you like
the
it.
Vienna
That's right.
Lager that we have on tap right now.
Vienskis.
I got
All
one
right.
quick sip already, and it was very clean.
Actually, talking to Jimmy J, we had a question last week, and why in a Vienna Lager? It's not just 100% Vienna malt.
And mine is not. It's actually a blend of Vienna and Munich, in this one. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
exactly what we said last week.
And why do you do that?
I think Vienna is a pretty powerful malt within itself, and with color and everything else. And I think Munich and Vienna are really nice base malts, but I feel like if you kind of layer them in together, you get a little bit more of that complexity of those really like toasty, bready notes.
This is really
which is
quality, actually. I
phenomenal.
love this.
Thank you.
Actually,
Very, very clean. There's no yeast esterification, or little yeast esterification, which I like.
Yeah.
But the biscuit comes through without being drying. It's just like a nice biscuit pop.
Sure, yeah.
Actually, this is a good question too. What malting company are you using for them?
So any of the beers we do that are traditional lagers, I'm pretty much using 100% Wireman malt. So try to stick with that. With anything, if I'm trying to do something that's traditional, I'm going to the origin. So if we've done a British beer or something like that, I'm trying to get Simpson's malt or a UK maltster, just to stick with the,
The tradition.
the tradition.
So somebody who might understand that when you're making a beer from a specific region, using those regional malts will help it taste better, more traditional towards that, instead of a malt that may be different from a local maltster. Could still be a tasty beer. But
Definitely,
that's traditional.
yeah. I mean, you could certainly make a beer, that would probably hold up to this in terms of what you're looking for. But I do feel like if you're trying to make a true German, beer of some style, getting those true German ingredients is really the only way to go. So.
That's a cheat code right there.
Yeah. Well, and I can say on that, there's a biscuitiness that's in a lot. I mean, almost all of the German malts you get that is not in any other German style maltster out there. I mean, the French Belgian gets it a little bit, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. I love it. I love best malts for that, and actually Viking gets that really well,
awesome.
too.
I've never used Viking, but heard some good things.
They're dark Munich. It's 8 Levabon, but all of those good fruity flavors.
You can just eat it just like a snack in the morning. Yes, for sure.
All right, we're getting to we digress. Actually, because you were talking about the yeast, what yeast did you use on this?
I believe this particular yeast was Harvest, I think, from
nice.
Imperial. So, yeah.
So that's really nice. You must have properly lager fermented it, because Harvest
Certainly.
can get fruity if you ferment it on the warm side. So.
Yeah, I've definitely had it. Yeah, if I'm making a traditional lager, I'm fermenting it. Usually I'm starting at 50 degrees and then over an extended period of time doing like a slow ramp up after most of primary fermentation is complete. But it's one of those things in a professional brewery where it's easy to monitor like your gravities every day, and you can kind of you can just adjust the temperature control. Coming from a homebrew background, I say it over and over again. Homebrewing is hard.
Homebrewing is a lot. You have to
Homebrewing's really
figure
hard.
out so much more that we just have equipment right
Yeah,
there.
exactly. There's a lot that's been streamlined on the professional side that I don't miss from the homebrew side.
Yeah, you push some buttons. You got your numbers hit, and you're good to go.
You're good to go. You're good to go.
Let's move on. Patrick Sandy last week was our first benefactor from the Amazon wish list. By the way, if you haven't checked that out, it's in the description below. Basically,
I also just posted the link.
Thank you, Matt.
Nice.
Basically, the story behind that is if you go on and support us via Amazon, kind of in lieu of a super chat, then we will at very least give you a shout out. And at very most, what we're doing for Patrick Sandy is he actually requested a beer video to be made using bread. And so we actually are going to turn that into 2 videos. We're going to make Tim go make bread at the grain shed. And then we're going to bring that bread back here and do a beer with it. And so,
awesome.
Are they willing to use some beer yeast for that too? Have you talked to them about that? Good. Because I want to use that farmhouse blend.
That's cool.
that'll be fun. You have 2 kind of sides of it.
Or Jovaru?
Well, let's use the dry yeast.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Ideas. Ah!
Dang it! All right. Yeah. Well, there's actually so. Let me take a step back, gather my thoughts, so I don't just keep rambling. Peter's wife works at a place in town. We actually make some root beer for him, which is phenomenal. Crimson Hearth. Go over there, have yourself some cinnamon rolls. But there's a guy there who makes bread. I think we talked about him before. There's a guy who makes bread over there with some beer yeast. He's been doing some really cool things, and I love the French Saison that he made with it. But the farmhouse blend, getting that blend of Saison yeast on it.
Yeah, and that was just going to build too, like a sourdough starter. You're going to get some extra, some flavies off of it.
Cool.
And plus with professional bread makers, so they can actually do it right. I mean, I've made delicious bread before, but for somebody else, for me to be like, here, use this yeast, then I get to sit in the back and watch him do it and then claim I did
you're going to get
something.
hands-on. We're going to get that kneading.
I am definitely going to slap some dough just to see that wiggle. That's one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, they'll be involved.
Yeah. All right.
Speed running through the last 2. We've got Raw Red and Tart Blonde in fermenters. Those 2 just got brewed-ish. Side note, if anyone knows how to fix a natural gas 7-barrel burner,
No burner.
Let us
Yeah.
know.
It may or may
Put
not
the
be
call
working.
out,
It may or may not be working, and that may or may not be a reason that we have a raw red ale coming up right now. I mean, it's mostly, yeah, it was not boiled at all, but it was whirlpooled for at least 2 to 3 hours with a whole bunch of American Noble hop. No, wait, sorry, I take that back. That was the Tart Blonde that's coming up. It was whirlpooled with a whole bunch of HBC 472s, which I have been absolutely and utterly loving.
It's gonna be the best beer you guys made.
Yeah.
It's gonna, and you'll never be able to.
100% recreatable. We never make the same beer twice anyway. It's all
Okay,
good.
well, that's fine.
Exactly. This is Jerry version
Then who needs
6.
a burner?
Yeah,
Right? Like,
Version
boiling's
6.
overrated.
Speaking of which, coming up, we do have a Tart Blonde in there. You said that, but the Tart Blonde is tasting phenomenal. That was sour mashed entirely on purpose.
Yep.
That one is done with American Noble hops, and it's literally tasting like an old school lemon drop candy.
Awesome.
Just that like tart and then sweet lemon. Oh man, I'm excited for that one. I'm excited for that.
Real quick, Adam in the chat has asked Adam if the recipe, he's doing a Vienna Lager, and he has about 70% Vienna, 20% Munich-ish. Is that close to yours?
I think I might have been more of 60-40, but I don't think he's off on that. I think it's just
What's
about
the other
preference.
10% for his?
I don't know.
70-20 doesn't work.
Love. It's love.
It's also Chumley, so
That's true.
Yeah, right.
it's probably something weird that he doesn't want to tell us.
Adam, send us some, and then we'll
Then we'll tell you if it was good.
we'll go to Garland Brewworks and we'll drink them side by side.
There you go.
Honestly, in that, I think you're probably on what I would say is the lightest end of the Munich for it. I would even go 50-50 Munich Vienna, depending on how strong you want the fruitiness to be in there and what color you want to achieve. A little bit more lighter, easy drinking Vienna, having about 20% Munich. That's pretty damn nice. This is really good too at that 40%. You could jump it to 50. I don't know that I would go over 50% Munich, but it's a big range for a Vienna lager. It lightens the biscuitiness, it lightens the fruitiness as you go more into the Vienna lager or Vienna malt in that. But it's up to you. This is amazing. I love it.
And it's caramel pills.
Caramel pills.
Except Jake suggested do a Crystal 120.
Definitely. That's
Definitely.
right. 100% Crystal 120.
Actually, I think at that point I'd probably use
juice, I think is what you'll
C60.
get.
Yeah. C60 would be my
Adam,
my
what was
initial guess.
your boil time on that, real quick?
I'm
do a
trying to
long boil,
remember.
or-
I don't think I did. I think I just did a 60-minute boil on this particular one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all the flavor development is just from those two malts.
Yeah, and you
development
certainly
too,
could.
there.
You could. I mean, it would give you a little bit more color by doing a longer boil. You could do 90 minutes, and that more of that Maillard reaction, getting a little bit more of those melanin, kind of. Yeah, it's good stuff.
They are
Yums.
so good. Reverend KY actually had a great suggestion, 10% shredded pretzel, and I love that idea. Actually,
I mean,
that sounds
stick
delicious. That
stick
sounds
with
delicious.
what's popular over in that region. Yeah.
Oh man, Reverend, I tried to send our
Little
cook
sauerkraut
over to
garnish.
see you. I'm not sure if he made it. He was just in like Seattle proper for a concert, but I hope he went.
Last speed run on our warm up, whatever, is Common Language Brewery. Just had their grand opening on Friday.
That's right. Yeah.
Brand new brewery in Spokane. Go check them out. I haven't gotten a chance to. Matt actually knows more about them than I do.
So we're going to drink there afterwards.
Maybe. I kind of want to
Clear
go
the
throw heavy
schedule.
things.
Well, yeah. Okay.
There's always
We'll
another
talk
day,
about that.
Tim.
We'll
Good
talk
point,
about that. We'll talk about that. Well, I also got to like speed through a couple of Lucha beers here quick. So
Okay.
Real
right.
quick. I think that's it for our news, which means we got to go on to our
Beer of the week. Bum bum bum. Beer of the week. Bum, 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 bum.
We taught Adam that jingle before the.
I forgot it. I
He
immediately
was
forgot it.
not surprised at all. He was just going for a drink of his beer. So
Yeah,
we
I was
thought
like,
it
oh,
an
is this where I missed my cue?
Yeah,
Thank
all right. So before we go into that, what did the policeman say to his belly button?
I'm not sure.
You're under a vest.
I don't know why just the lead in there was.
Yeah, it was perfect.
If I had a groan sound effect, I would push that right now.
We need to get you one of those little pad boards you can just like throw sound effects on.
I think that's what we're going to add to the Amazon wish list.
Perfect.
All right. So, Matt, going into before we get into it, we may need a beer to exemplify this style. So, either that one, or let's go for that one first.
What?
It's a Vienna Lager. You telling me you are the one with the most full beer right now? How is this happening?
I'm trying to get through one. I do things in order. We're talking about Old Bruin today.
All right.
For
So,
our beer of the week.
Beer of the week is Mixed Firm, Old Bruin. Go, Peter.
So the reason we're doing Old Bruin is because it's one of the Mixed Firm sour styles of beer, and Adam actually was able to help grow a Foeder program, and we're going to talk a little bit more later about what you all did to kind of build the Mixed Firm culture and everything in that Foeder program.
For sure.
But Old Bruin's definitely a fun style that goes in there. It's basically it's like the Flanders Red, but it's brownier.
That's perfect.
I should have actually brought some. I thought about it, but I wanted to do a vertical. I should have brought some of my fruit cake because that is an Old Bruin.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I have 2013 to 2019.
That's Crux.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Fruit cake.
That's
is
how you
one
know
of
it's
my
good.
favorite.
Yeah, there we go.
Nah, yeah. All right, sir.
Thank
Pour
you,
us up
Brett,
some beers.
for that beautiful foam.
Old Bruin, yeah. Well, yeah. There are some differences between the Flanders Red and the Old Bruin, especially with some of the bacteria that goes in there. But it's a delicious beer. Overall impression: a malty, fruity, aged, somewhat sour Belgian-style brown ale. And actually, this is something that happens in Old Bruin and Flanders Red and BJCP. They both say that they're somewhat sour, and I really don't enjoy that because they are very sour. It's just so complex, and over the aging, you don't get the impact of that full acid as much as you would, say, from a kettle sour or an American sour. It's just much more well-aged, and if you're basing it off of some of the imports, because of American taste, they do add some sweeteners back into it, which is unfortunate sometimes, but also delicious sometimes.
Okay.
Appearance: they're dark reddish to brownish in color, good clarity, average to good head retention, and ivory to tan light in head color. That's the thing.
Yeah, but, I mean, you did it, and I understand why, but...
Yeah, the somewhat sour bit. I mean, I've had definitely Old Bruins and Flanders that get. I mean, it's the acidic sour. When you get acidic sour at all, that's really powerful.
Yeah, it's that vinegar kind of characteristic that can be kind of sharp. Although especially like if you think about some of like Rodenbach, to me is kind of like one of the. It's so well blended and balanced that it's like the perfect amount, and it kind of just hits mid palate. And I mean, there's definitely, if you have an American sour, sometimes there is like an aggressive, tartness, whether it be lactic forward or acetic. But I don't. Yeah. Old Bruin's just so like you said, Tim, so complex and well rounded that it's like
you're not gonna have that one big punch.
No, and it's not gonna wear out your palate. You could sit and drink it all day if you want.
In all honesty, I will say it's not the Old Bruin, but the Old Bruin is right behind it. My desert island beer. If there's only one beer I could drink for the rest of my life, it'll probably be Leafman's Cuvée Brut. It's not called Cuvée Brut anymore, and I don't care. It's Cuvée Brut, but Woutenbond is a close second.
Yeah.
And I can see when you're drinking Woutenbond, it doesn't taste as sour as it is because it is so complex, and through the oak aging, there's these really nice, soft, well-developed notes, the oxidation that goes along with the oak's aging. But if you took a pH reading, that sucker would be down there. Aroma. Let's move on to aroma here. Complex combination of fruity esters and rich malt character. Medium to medium-high esters, commonly reminiscent of plums, figs, dates, black cherries, and prunes. Medium-low to medium-high malt character of caramel, toffee, orange, treacle, or chocolate. Spicy phenols can be present in low amounts for complexity. A sherry-like character may be present and generally denotes an aged example, which I actually really like, the sherry-like oxidation that can be in the Foeder aged Old Bruins.
That's a good side of oxidation.
Yeah, so good. Low sour aroma may be present and can modestly increase with age, but should not grow to a noticeably acetic, vinegary character. Hop aroma absent. Diacetyl is perceived only in very minor quantities, if at all, as a complementary aroma.
So diacetyl, if you have diacetyl in any mixed firm sour, Old Bruin, Flanders, whatever, American Wild Ale, if it's got Petio and Brett and if it's got all the bugs basically, then that's usually a sign for me to just wait because it's gonna end up getting cleared up.
Yeah.
I just don't like the acid. I like all the other complexities. I like the sherry. It's a pseudo sweetness, an oxidized sweetness. I like all those other things, but I do like that when they're going over aroma, they talk about a lot of the malt complexity that can go into an old Bruin too. They talk about the raisin esters and stuff like that.
Yeah, sometimes you'll find one that smells like a quick bread or a dessert cake. You get that really rich, fruity, raisiny fig kind of notes in
fruit
there.
cake.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually,
smells like a holiday fruit cake.
Yeah.
I've said more than once smelling. I'm like, oh, it smells like Christmas.
Yeah. And that's actually, fruit cake. If you are anywhere near Crux and can get a hold of it, their old Bruin fruit cake, that is one of my absolute favorite beers on earth too. It's incredible. It's very sweet and fruity coming up front, and then as you let it age, it gets intensely sour. It's amazing.
La Folie is another one that I think that's style, and that one's widely available, and it's really good.
Yeah,
and comes from a Foeder as well.
Yeah,
a gigantic one.
Yeah, slightly bigger than we've
La
been able to
Folie,
afford so far here in Spokane. But
right? La Folie, the only thing that I'll say is kind of missing from that is the actual age of the brewery itself. Right? Well, no, age of the brewery itself. Because, when you go to some of the Belgian ones, they've been around for hundreds of years. And the way that they inoculate their brew house is by taking bottles and literally just spraying it on the open wood to get all those good bugs back in there. And not to say that New Belgium hasn't been around a while, but they haven't been around for hundreds of years to develop that huge mix of culture going in. It's wildly beautiful, but
I'm not sure too. I know for a while, I don't know if they're still doing it, but they did typically also flash pasteurize for packaging, and sometimes the imported ones are or are not, but there is something to be said too about the development of the character in the bottle. And with La Folie being flash pasteurized, you might as well drink it now. It's really not going to change very much after it's been done. That was done for shelf stability. So
so they can get everywhere, which is nice.
Right.
It's more accessible, but it does lose some character.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that is a lot of these beers that you find on the market.
It's a good introduction, though. La Folie for specifically is a really good introduction to the style.
Especially if you've never had it. I think that's a great stepping stone into
It's
trying
beautiful. I do think it's way more intensely sour than some of the Belgian versions. If you can find yourself some Woutenbond, and it looks like Gutenbond, Woutenbond, literally Woutenbond is the BJCP guideline. When they wrote the guideline for Old Bruin, it was written off of Leafman's Woutenbond. That is another beautiful, beautiful entry that you can get fairly readily easily. So, all right, what are we on to? What are we looking at?
Flavor pretty much mimics the aroma. You got the same things: plums, figs, dates. You've got the diacetyl that you shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Low oxidation is appropriate. That's going into the sherry-like kind of qualities. It's a sweet but almost cardboardy kind of flavor. But cardboard, if it goes into cardboard where you can feel it, it's bad.
Yeah.
A lot of the same stuff. It shouldn't be a noticeably acidic or vinegar, but a touch of acidic is fine. I've had some styles that are made quote unquote commercially that are very acidic, which I don't necessarily mind because I'm also someone who can drink pickle juice, but it's definitely not appropriate for the style.
Especially in an old Bruin, if you go too far onto that, and that's vinegar acid. You're basically making malt vinegar. If you go too far into the acidic acid, that's
very
malt
expensive
vinegar.
malt vinegar.
Yeah, just dip your French fries in your glass, and you're good to go.
Exactly.
It's good, and that's exactly what you do with it. You have the world's best malt vinegar. I did that once, and it was a cherry. I blended one of my long aging sours. You got out of my Solara a couple of times, and then I got too much oxygen in it. It went full acetic, and I made cherry bourbon malt vinegar, and it was amazing.
Sounds
I just
awesome.
had 5 gallons of vinegar.
Let's have a fish fry.
But yeah, I like it when it's present in there. I really think it does add something, and I think that's one of the big denotions between a Flanders Red and an Old Bruin is that acetic acid. Flanders Red generally doesn't have that, and I like it. It gives you that nice sharp twang, but it shouldn't be malt vinegar. Don't make malt vinegar. Well, do, and then send us some so we can eat it. But
make sure to mark it for me so that way they just don't consume it
Yeah, no promises.
No promises. No promises.
Yeah, if I'm here late at night and I see a bottle that's unmarked, it's getting drink.
It's getting dry.
That's brave.
Right? Yeah, it's just, you're around homebrewers long enough, you just learn to trust the process.
True, yeah.
Mouthfeel, medium to medium full body, which actually kind of surprised me a little bit because a lot of the things that create mouthfeel are going to get broken down over time. Low to moderate carbonation, that also seems weird. And no astringency, that seems right.
Yeah. Well, this being built off of Wooten Bond definitely has a lower carbonation going into it, which is more indicative of a fresh or a fixed old Bruin where it doesn't have the Brett still living in the bottle, unaged, unlong aged. If you're aging it, yeah, exactly what happened to this
you
happens.
can scoop the foam off of this beer with a spoon.
It does get super overcarbonated. The medium to full body actually doesn't surprise me quite as much because of the heavy oak aging in it, getting all of those extra vanillins coming from the oak and the big tannins coming from it, plus the way that Belgians generally make the old Bruin, which is stupid. They had to do it through tax reasons, and I mean ridiculous stupid. Turbid mashes. Turbid mashes. We'll talk about a turbid mash. But if you ever want to mash for 12 hours, stirring that thing with just barely enough liquid to get it wet, that's a turbid mash in like its basic form. It creates some really good complex things, especially proteins that go in to feed all of these bugs. But
over a long period of time too, right? It's like a huge sandwich for these bugs to chew on for years, basically.
Oh man, it's absolutely insane. Go look up a turbid mash if you really want to see some ridiculous things. So that the medium to medium full body. I mean, medium full seems a little high for me, but
yeah.
I could see a medium, especially in some of the commercial versions that are back sweetened, having that extra sugar going into it.
That makes sense.
Lindemans is huge on that.
Yeah.
They taste amazing. Make cranberry sauce out of Lindemans. You will love yourself. But they do back sweeten it.
They do. Yeah, I actually had the opportunity to tour Lindemans over in Belgium, and it's actually they have a particular lambic beers that they do that is accepted part of that style is to back sweeten it with sugar. We had one that was a very low alcohol, and they back sweeten it quite a bit. It was very sweet, and the tour guide even said it's popular with children. It definitely has a very different feel. It affects the mouthfeel. There's a little bit more of that thicker sweetness to those beers too.
Well, and I guess that's something we should also talk about in that where these grew up in Belgium in the cafes over there, because they can be kept for so long and be so intensely sour that you can be served sugar along with your beer to back sweeten it yourself at the table. So it's not an uncommon thing for Belgians where these beers develop for them to be sweetened. It's just generally at your table.
Yeah, they showed us at Lindemans, they have a special glass that has kind of a very thick bottom that they would muddle sugar in the bottom, kind of smash sugar cubes, and then pour the beer on top. And it would be served that way in cafes. So,
yeah, nice. How much lamb is in lambic beers? Only the genus lambic.
Yeah, you never know.
At least 2.
Little shawarma.
He said that. My mind immediately went to shawarma. I'm like, how can we actually make that work? That could be some good flavors.
Glaze on some shawarma. I'm in.
Sriracha Ace hops. Yeah. We're going there. All right. All right. Comments. Long aging and blending of young and aged beers may occur, adding smoothness and complexity and balancing any harsh sour character. This style was designed to lay down, so examples with a moderate age character are considered superior to younger examples. It does actually lay down very well. It provides big or small spoon, whichever you prefer. As in fruit lambics, old Bruins can be used as a base for fruit-flavored beers such as Kriek or Framboisen. Though these should be entered in a classic-style fruit beer category. I think actually now they might have fruited sour, which would be more appropriate in there. And actually, fruitcake is one of those. They add in dates, figs, plums, cherries, all the stuff you put into fruitcake.
Live lamb, it's just...
I mean,
Well,
I would not put it past Crux. Oh man, I love that.
Well, and Reverend figured out Iron Goat's secret. It's they don't use lamb, they use goats.
There you
yes.
go.
That is it. Yeah, that's the one.
It provides the extra funk.
Yeah, a little more barnyard character from the goat.
Plus, you got something to eat the mash afterwards.
Right.
History and old ale tradition indigenous to East Flanders, typified by the products of Leafman Brewery, now owned by Riva, which roots back to the 1600s. Historically brewed as provision beer, that it developed some sourness as aged. These beers were typically more sour than current commercial examples, while Flanders red beers, aged in oak, the brown beers are warm aged in stainless steel.
You know,
I think oak works too.
Most of them I've had have been Foeder aged, and I'm gonna
Which
say
that's different than like oak aged, because Foeders are so big that the surface area is
a little
tremendously
bit different.
reduced.
I'm also gonna say historically it probably wasn't stainless steel, considering that in the 1600s they didn't have stainless steel tanks.
It was definitely
Foeders.
oak.
Not that we're arguing with BJCP at all, though maybe they should check out when stainless steel was invented. But most of the better examples that I've had, like La Folie, like Freak Cake, like Leafman's, is Foeder aged.
Yeah. And even touring Lindemans, they have Lindemans is sort of the macro lambic, and they sort of run their operation that way. But they do a lot of aging in giant stainless steel tanks. It doesn't look too unfamiliar to like a large American brewery, and they sort of cheat by using the same thing that a homebrewer might use. They use large oak chips, and they just throw them in giant bags in these vats and let them sit for a shorter amount of time, more surface area. They pick up the oak character they're looking for. So I imagine that's probably more of a modern implication of what they're doing now.
Yeah.
By the way, Tim, to answer your question, 1913 is when stainless steel was invented.
Yeah,
There you go.
So
So
they
right
were
around the same
missing
time as
300
Bruin
years in that
Just a
history there,
century or so.
BJCP. 300, 200? I don't know. Somebody do that math and then write them. Anyway, and along with that, I'm going to say you don't pick up the sherry-like notes without oak as easily. You can get them, but without the actual oak, it's hard. You need that micro-oxygenation to happen.
Micro-oxidation, and there are certain precursors that actually help them get oxidated under oak versus getting oxidated under open conditions.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a tiny bit of gripe on there, and then BJCP is really trying to reflect modern styles, and a lot of modern styles are like this, and that's what I do think is missing from some of them. La Folie, in my opinion, could pick up a lot more sherry.
See the live chat if you pull up on your phone.
Oh, I look horrible. I don't want to see that.
All right. La Folie to
look
me
adorable.
could use a little bit more time and have a little bit more sherry notes in there. I mean, I know it is Foeder aged.
Yeah.
They're trying to push something out commercially, which is what we're all trying to do on there. That is money that we're sitting on, and it's hard to sit on that, especially something that big, that amount in a Foeder. But in my opinion, if you don't, I don't know, I love that sherryness in there. I think that's a huge component to these beers. They're some of my favorites, if you can't tell. Characteristic ingredients. Actually, it's pretty simple that goes into this. A base of Pils malt with a judicious amount of dark caramel malts. This is not crystal.
It's like crystal adjacent malt. So Special B would be a very appropriate
Special
one.
B
Special
is-
X if you want to get some more biscuit flavor on the back end.
Yeah.
And you can use a range of caramel. So if you used something on the lighter end like caramel pills, again, something we like a lot more than like C10 or C15 personally. That'd be a great way to go. And then a tiny bit of black or roasted malts, and I think now Carafa, debittered Carafa is available too. I'd kind of prefer that over a more acidic or aggressive.
Right.
Which is probably the malt closer to historic styles that they were using, since, hey, they're right close to Germany there, and that's where a lot of malt houses were. There's some good malt houses on the border of France and Belgium around there too, but they're very close to the German styles, which are less roasty and a lot more smooth on the dark malts.
Yeah, it's something too, like with those dark fruit characters. Every now and then with an Ode Bruin, you get that, like, just that slightest hint of like a chocolate character that blends well with those fruits that definitely you don't find in like a Flanders Red. That sort of sets it apart too, and it's that roasted malt that kind of contributes that.
For me, the dark caramels, a caramelized type of malt, it's going to be Special B. In Belgians, I just think Special B was made for that. It's so plummy, figgy, and fruity. Supplementing that with tiny other bits of, like Peter was saying, get a little more biscuit on Special X, Abbey malt for that really high biscuity amberness that's in there.
And the Abbey malt you can use at a higher
pills.
percentage too, like mid-range.
Or even the pills is normally what they're using, but you can use less caramels if you use a more dark, aggressive base malt. I would say Chevalier could probably be a perfect base malt for this. Chevalier, some Carafa 3, and a little bit of Special B could be an amazing old brew.
Jimmy J asks, would chocolate wheat or midnight wheat work? I did a dark lager using chocolate wheat and chocolate rye as my roasted grains. Chocolate wheat's one of my favorite dark roasted grains because it's not only that roast quality, not only that chocolate quality, but wheat specifically brings a fruitiness that really helps develop, and I think would blend really well in with this. So chocolate wheat would probably, out of those, would be my suggestion.
And I feel it has kind of the same qualities as something like a dehusked like Carafa, where you get that smoother character. You don't get so much of the upfront kind of harsh roasty character too. So.
And it's that little bit of extra fruitiness going into the old brew, and that'd be amazing too.
Heck
There's
yeah.
a lot of different ways to create them, and historically, because of tax reasons, these beers were made in really interesting ways. Make it how you make it, and then send us some, and we'll tell you if it's close.
Make sure you
all right.
it for me.
Low alpha acid continental hops are typical. Avoid high alpha acid or distinctive American hops.
No Citra in these guys?
It's a dry hop.
I mean, definitely do that. I was going to throw some Galaxy over the top.
Oh yeah,
Actually, what's the HBC? Is it the 472s that's like tobacco-y and
472s.
woody? Like, that would be amazing.
would be interesting.
Elixir.
Yeah.
Cognac and leather.
Yeah, some of those.
That could be good. Anyway.
Not in high proportion. Yeah. The answer is no, but also we're us.
Old Bruins typically are not hopped, or they're using aged hop. They're basically having the bacteria or the antibacterial content to them and no flavor at all. That is very indicative of these beers. It shouldn't really have hop character to it at all, unless you're an American and you make something like La Terrière.
Right.
Which is New Belgium's La Folie, just dry hopped. Also delicious. Saccharomyces and lactobacillus and acetobacter contribute to fermentation and eventual flavor. Lactobacillus reacts poorly to elevated levels of alcohol as well as IBUs. Most of them are killed off by 4 IBUs. I think the strongest one out there is killed off by 12.
No, 21. There's it's a derivative of plantarum that's killed off at about 21, but it's
it's
very
specialized.
Well, it's one of those ones that it's just kind of like beefed up over the time. It's like, hey, we're gonna start adding hops to these and throw a lot of lacto at it, and then eventually something came out that can handle it.
Most of them are going to be killed. That's a reason that hops are not really used. And most of the time when you're aging in oak, what the Belgians would do is just throw the loose leaf hops over the top. That way it wouldn't mold.
Just wave them nearby.
Yeah, just Acetobacter is in there. I'm also going to call BJCP out on this too, because Brett is a large component of these beers.
Yeah.
One of, in my opinion, the bigger components of these beers, especially through all the different pathways of fermentation that go through between acids, alcohols, sugars, proteins, and all of that.
Well, and if you think about too, before we had commercial yeast pitches, I mean, they were being naturally inoculated, and guess what? Brett's all over the place.
Yeah, it's probably the easiest natural inoculator. Yeah.
When I did the Lindemans tour, the tour guide had he had little samples of all the ingredients, and then they had aged hops and the malt, so you could see it. And then he had an empty jar that just said Brettanomyces on it, and he opened up the jar and he said, "This is the magic that makes it." And then I said, "Well, you just let it out," so it's floating around, and it's growing on those barrels and those foeders. So it's in there, man.
It's absolutely everywhere, and multiple strains on it. That is actually one thing that's hard to recreate this in the home scene, especially right away, is that, especially traditional examples, it's not just one form of sac, it's not one form of lacto, it's not one form of Brett. there are multiple and multiples. I believe one time I heard that one brewery over there has over 200 different microbes that ferment their beer, between Saccharomyces, Lactobacillus, Pediococcus, Acetobacter, and Britannomyces in all their different forms.
And they know how to get along. They're microbes.
Yeah, I mean, most of them. You get a little Saison in there, and it kicks everybody around a little bit, keeps them in check. But
It's a killer.
that is one thing when you're trying to make a kind of this culture at home. If you can have a Solara where you keep pulling off of it, keep adding different forms. Never stay with the same forms. If you're Saccharomyces and Britannomyces especially, try to throw as many different bugs in there as you can to ferment these guys out, in my opinion. Whatever that counts for.
By the way, there are 73 of you watching, and I do not see that many likes on this video yet. So if you can, please just do the what's this thing called? The button. Press that thing. So let's move on to topic number
press
one.
it looks like this.
Yeah, the thing. Yeah, except for it's bluer. I don't know.
Well, I think it's clear until you press it, and then it's blue.
Let's talk about Foeders, guys.
Yeah. We're all done with those.
Yeah, we're close enough.
Well, I'm just making
Adam.
sure we're not missing anything important in there. But
Yeah, it's a live shot. It's nothing important at all.
Yeah.
We'll get stuff out there. Adam, what's the difference between a Foeder and a barrel? Let's start with that.
Sure. Yeah. Typically, it's size. There's some discussion of what classifies as a Foeder. But it's typically, I think usually it's around 3 times larger than a typical standard like wine barrel. So usually they're somewhere right around 4 to 5 barrels to start, and can be massive in terms of volume. But so they're large oak vessels used for aging some sort of liquid within. They traditionally came from, Foeder is a Dutch word that just came from the word vat. There's always this kind of cross adoption of language between like France and its bordering countries. So that became, in France they spell it slightly different. So if you've ever seen, it looks like Foudre, F-O-U-R or F-O-U-D-R-E, but means the same thing.
Yeah.
Essentially they're giant oak vessels that are bigger than barrels. Came from the wine industry kind of originally, like a lot of wine was aged in it, and up until fairly recently, at least in America, if you wanted to have a Foeder program and have larger oak vessels to age beer in, you were probably getting them used from a winery at some point. There's now one single company in the United States in Missouri called Foeder Crafters of America that are making brand new virgin Foeders of all different sizes and shapes for breweries around the world. But yeah.
So in a Foeder program, there's kind of 2 main differences that you're getting between that and barrel. One's going to be, especially if you're getting a used one from the wine industry, the amount of oak presence that is available.
Certainly, yeah. One thing to keep in mind is that with larger volume means that you've got more beer to oak ratio. So in something like a barrel, or even if homebrewers have some of them have like the little 5-gallon like spirit barrels and stuff, your beer to oak ratio is a lot closer. You've got a lot of oak and a lot of beer.
Sorry.
A lot of oak and a lot of beer. So you're going to pick up a lot of the characteristics that come from that oak a lot quicker. And you're also going to get more oxygen ingress quicker too, because you've just got, hey, what do we got here? Is this 15?
10.
10 gallons?
So if you look at this and how small it is, there's a shit ton of oak to a little bit of beer.
Which means a lot more oxygen and a lot more oaks.
Yeah. So ultimately, like if you're going to sum it up, Foeders do the same thing that barrel aging does, but over a longer period of time in a slower, more developed way. So you will typically get kind of a more gradual development of those characteristics. And of course, with just the practicality, you also can age a lot more beer in like a single vessel that takes up a smaller footprint, as opposed to like say having 100 wine oak barrels somewhere stacked in your brewery.
And the other side to it is also that you're a lot of times with Foeders, especially because of their size and their utility, they are being reused a lot over and over and over again, which means that initial oak quality is going to kind of go away, especially if you originally got it from the wine industry and the original oak contact has kind of already been ripped off.
Definitely moves towards kind of a neutral zone a lot quicker. And it's not uncommon to have, if you're managing a barrel program in a brewery, you maybe do 1, 2, maybe 3 runs through that barrel, and then you're not getting anything out of it really, and maybe your culture's going more acetic than you want because all that oxygen ingress. You've had acetobacter kind of take over in the barrel, so it goes out the door. It becomes a patio planter or something, right? Or you sell it to a clueless homebrewer and have them make a bunch of malt vinegar or whatever. But with a foeder, you're typically in it for the long haul because of that larger vat. It becomes sort of a neutral aging vessel. It's very common, particularly in Belgium, in that region. Lambic producers, that's mostly what you're going to see. I mean, Cantillon has a lot of single barrels, but if you go to like Trefontainen and any of those places, they've got tons of foeders, and they're aging their beer in large oak vessels and then doing some blending as things go along.
So barrel or foeder management becomes pretty important on the larger scale, right? So
certainly,
when you were at Iron Goat, you did some development of their house culture, right?
Yeah.
And what did you do to kind of take care of the barrel and make sure that the house culture was kept intact?
Yeah, I mean, at Iron Goat, when they first sort of started their mixed culture program, they were doing it in old wine barrels. Essentially, they were just doing it in 60-gallon barrels. They started acquiring more, and I think by the time I left Iron Goat, we had something like 60-ish wine barrels, and I would say maybe 40 were full at the time. But we had acquired a okay. Are you going to force choke me? I don't know. We acquired a 30-barrel foeder. That's just I wanted to see you go underneath, decant it as you went. But yeah, so it was a 40 hectoliter, roughly a 30-barrel foeder. So that's a lot of beer, but it went into one gigantic, large oak barrel. And so before that, it was a lot of blending. They were inoculating barrels basically one by one with different bugs, whether that be a mix of bacteria and yeast. Tasting each barrel at a time, going, oh, this one tastes great. This one's a little too sour. What if we blended these two together? It's fun, but it's also a lot of labor. It's a lot of work. And when you're spreading all your beer over that many different vessels with a lot of factors that can affect your beer, it was not uncommon to taste a few barrels and go, wow, that tastes like moldy feet and garbage. Like we're dumping this barrel. And I remember listening to like podcasts early on from like the Rare Barrel and stuff, those people saying like, oh yeah, just if you're going to start a mixed fermentation program, just accept the fact that you're going to be dumping anywhere from 10 to 20% of your beer at least. Yeah, right. And that becomes common with the foeder. I think if you take the right approach to it, there's going to be hopefully a lot less of that because you're getting a lot less of that like oxygen ingress. You're hopefully controlling the culture a little bit more, and that way you're not dumping as much beer.
Did you introduce one bacteria at a time, or like did you kind of?
It was so the first time we filled it to a full volume.
Just keep writing them down. There's some really good questions coming through.
Yeah. I think we initially filled it halfway on a single day, inoculated the batch, and then filled it the rest of the way the following day or within 48 hours. We inoculated it, our foeder at Iron Goat, with a mix of yeast and bacteria. So there was a Saison yeast that went in for initial primary fermentation. Along with that went a mix of lactic producing bacteria of Pediococcus and Lactobacillus. And I think that was mostly just several different strains of all of those, but that was pretty much everything that went in. I do remember pitching all that stuff. That was all fresh pitches from a yeast lab. So I remember doing the math, and I'm like, oh, I'm about to pitch. Like, it was like $800 worth. I was like, boy, I hope I don't spill any of this, But and there was, because we had that primary Saccharomyces strain, there was definitely some fermentation to start, but we didn't end up pulling anything from that foeder, I think, for at least 7 to 8 months. Wow. Letting that secondary, that bacteria and stuff sort of start to come into play, because I remember pulling some samples kind of early on just to see, and it tasted like a fairly clean Saison at the time, and it wasn't until about the 6-month mark where it was like, I'm sorry, there was Brettanomyces in there as well. But there's some funk in here. Ooh, and I'm getting a little acidity, and so you start to get that flavor development. And the plan sort of became at that point that we were going to treat that 40-barrel fermenter as a Solera. Nice. We were going to basically pull off 7 barrels at a time, do something with that, and then top it back off and let that culture just continue to develop over time as we sort of pulled things off.
Did you top it off with fresh wort, or did you top it off with aged beer or fermented beer?
Yeah, so we always brewed fresh wort and then put it back in.
That's what we do too. So, but I know you can do it both ways, especially if you build a beer that's a high adjunct style, a high protein, high long chain starch beer style.
Yeah, for sure.
Insulamista Calibos?
Or consecration.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to pick.
I think the
I'm
answer
sorry.
is yes.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, yes. Let's start with consecration.
All right.
For no other reason than it was on the right, and I just chose it that way.
And he's right-handed.
Because that's right. You
All right,
picked
Matt,
the
shoot
right
a question
one.
at us, and then glasses.
Yeah.
Well, all of us have clean glass. You poured that into your clean
Well, you
glass.
handed me that when I got a clean glass.
You had the dirty glass with it already in there.
Well, no, I had one glass, and then that was Matt's glass was the other glass.
I should mention that the previous beer we were drinking was from Holy Mountain, which was also a Foeder aged beer. It was a dry hop saison. I think that they, I don't know if they bottle condition it with Brett but Brett comes into some.
Yeah,
where,
they put Brett in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll mention that the Brett character on that was relatively dry.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Yo,
like
question,
it wasn't like a
guys?
funky or pineapple-y Brett.
Yeah.
That's actually related to topic. Adam asks, so the big ass fooders that Ron has at Garden Paths, do they have a shelf life then, or can they use perpetually?
I mean, if we're to learn anything from the established like Belgian lambic breweries, some of those have had those fooders for nearly a century at least. I mean, there is a point in time. It is wood, right? And it's sitting under like an acidic environment over time that oak is going to start to break down. There's even been some scientific studies that says that Brett over time can metabolize the cellulose of wood over time
Yeah,
and start to actually feed off of it. So eventually your somewhat airtight micro oxygenation foeder is going to become more of a macro oxygenation and maybe some leaks. But if you're properly taking care of a foeder,
Those proportions are not.
I'm sorry.
if you're properly
got
taking
excited.
care of your giant oak vessel, it can last for a very long time. Yeah, to answer that question.
And that is true. And what he's talking about, it's not even foeders and barrels. There are some barrels that are in some of the older lambic, sour, Rodenbach, Cantillon, Leafmans, Lindemans, all of those guys, Tilquin.
Yep.
There's probably some barrels in there that are hundreds of years old, because as long as you take care of it and it's still producing good beer, in sour beers, yeah, you're using some of that oak for the actual oak character, but a lot of it is for the oxygenation that goes on in the oak and how the oak preserves different bacterias and yeast and creates different flavors in them. And that's why blending is huge in the sour beers, especially sour beers, sour breweries that have barrels in them. You're taking this super funk and then adding it to this real high acid with this younger, very sweet beer to come out with a beautifully balanced beer that's going to age well. So
Very true.
it is one of those things. And foeders are a little bit different because you can replace specific staves on them. So if your oak becomes tired in a foeder, you can actually start replacing staves inside of them, and theoretically the vessel could last forever while the oak could be replaced.
It is a lot of work. I mean, like a cooper that makes a barrel, there's a certain amount of time, but especially a large foeder takes a team of people. And a lot of these newer foeders have like manways where if you wanted to, you can climb in. I know that some places like New Belgium do like every 5 to 7 years, they do like barrel management where they'll pull most of that beer out, preserve that culture, and they'll like do like a steam stripping or a high pressure like water stripping of like the initial layer of that wood to either knock back the culture that's been developing or clean the wood. Some will re-char the wood. It's pretty common to have some sort of toast on a at least a newer crafted foeder. So yeah,
Pop some of the vanillins and all that.
yep.
I'm going to get on this one because I just saw it. Sydney Husky, off topic. If you reduce a soft drink like Dr. Pepper to a molasses consistency and then add it to a beer, will the high fructose corn sugar ferment? Hell yeah, it will. Ferment real well. Any other issues to not do it? If you do it in a high enough concentration, the preservatives that are in there are going to actually inhibit fermentation in your beer. Reducing it into a molasses, you should either denature, aerosolize, and get them off, or just not have enough for a beer, not to make it matter. Don't burn it. It could be really delicious. A Dr. Pepper Stout actually sounds like actually, I take that back. A Dr. Pepper Quad.
I'm
Sounds
adding it to your list
great.
of ideas.
I mean,
That sounds
cola
great.
is a descriptor in some of those beers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a note, especially in like mixed firm aged beers. So.
Something like actually the merchant craft cola that's very, very woody and
Yeah,
barky.
yeah.
That could be amazing in that.
I just don't like the risk of tasting like Newcastle, because Newcastle actually adds artificial caramel flavoring.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
something you'd find in like a mass-produced soda. Too.
Yeah.
All right. So if you're gonna do a soda, try to make it a more natural soda. Try to, using Mexican Coke rather than regular Coke is probably a better idea in there. Or getting more of a craft soda, something like Jones soda or something like that, will probably work better than your mass-produced, just because those flavors are so fake that when you taste them in your beer, they're gonna be fake. So.
And Quad was exactly what Sydney was thinking.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to do, but make sure that you're using good flavors to do it.
I've added it to your brew idea list I have over here.
Okay, no, all right. So this is extremely off topic. I'm really gonna digress, but Friday, because I had a bunch of people coming over, I took some of our tamarind soda home. And I reduced that down, put some butter into it with a little bit of like soy sauce in there for a good pork kind of sweet gravy. Holy shit, that was so good. That was so good. Oh my God. So I like the idea of reducing sodas. Just make sure that when you're doing it, try to use something that's a little bit better. Just for the fact that when you're using fake flavors come across.
All right, so I think we've gone through most of the topics that are here. Do you want to go into trying to do the homebrew level one, or we just want to go into Q&A?
I mean, I can just kind of briefly talk about it. I know it, so.
Well, should we fly through a couple of Q&As before going into
Well,
homebrew?
let's go into the homebrew stuff.
Okay,
and then
let's go into homebrew
we can
stuff,
end with
and then
Q&A, and then
Okay.
it might answer a few Q&As.
There we go. Okay.
there you go.
So, mixed fermentation kind of became a passion of mine fairly early on when I started getting into beer. I had the chance to try some mixed fermentation beer, and I've been if I had to eat candy, I liked sour candy. I liked sour tart
God,
things. I
yes.
like pickle juice too.
Plain salt in the bottom
So-
of Sour Patch Kids. It's
Right,
my
like-
favorite part.
So I was like something like tart and sour or fruity always appealed to me anyway. So when I discovered that there was this whole world of beer that kind of hit all those notes, I got interested. And of course, so I wanted to try it as a home brewer. As a home brewer, mixed fermentation, there's a lot more of sort of on the management side of things that you kind of have to consider if you're hoping to make drinkable mixed fermentation beer, because like we've mentioned before, there's multiple bugs at play. You're usually using bacteria and yeast. Sometimes it could be wild yeast like Brettanomyces. All those things behave a little differently than if you're just throwing in a packet of your good old Saccharomyces yeast to use. Sometimes time is encouraged because you need those flavors to develop. Peter mentioned early on about the development of diacetyl. There are some bacteria like Pediococcus which are really good at producing diacetyl as they slowly ferment and create acid. And so you need things like Brettanomyces, which typically is able to break down diacetyl over time, to be present as well. So there's lots to consider and factors that might not come into play if you're, say, just brewing your straight old Irish Stout or your good old West Coast IPA. But if you do your research, and there's tons of resources out there, I think you can make a nice mixed fermentation program at home. One of the big factors I think you have to think about is what vessels you're using. Home brewers have a little bit more tendency to maybe have some cross contamination points. And I do think that early on when there was a lot of discussions about Brettanomyces as a yeast and using it, there was like this big panic of, oh my God, if my Brettanomyces even enters my house, it's going to cross-contaminate my entire brewery.
Oh man, do not be scared of Brett.
Don't be scared of Brett. I mean, there is some
What's the
advice
worst that could
on-
happen? You make a decent beer better. I don't know.
That's exactly it. If you infect a beer with Brett, pretty much the only thing you're going to do is make it taste better. You just need to give it time.
I might disagree a little bit because Brett can make some really great phenolic characters that taste like
true.
Band-Aids and plastic and smoke that you may not want. But
Yeah.
But it's pretty. There are some factors there. I always adopted the idea of, at least if I had plastic or silicone parts, I would have some dedicated to the sour side, just because those are a little harder to clean and ensure that they're sanitized as a home brewer. But there's been a lot of studies that says Brett is not as airborne as people originally thought. It lives on certain surfaces, but it's not like it's it blows around your brewery and can land in all kinds of stuff. So, don't be afraid there. I do think making sure that you have a system in place that wherever you're fermenting, you can control oxygen ingress or eliminate it. Some of that bacteria and or yeast, when they get into the presence of a significant amount of oxygen, they start producing things that you may not want in your beer, and it's pretty obvious. You can, now this smells
Baby
like
barf.
malt vinegar, or it smells like feet, or it
Baby
smells like
barf.
vomit. This is not what I want to drink and give to my friends, and a lot of that comes with just oxygenation, and so you have to be a little bit more crucial around those sorts of things when you're doing mixed fermentation.
Yeah, especially with long-term aging, like plastic buckets. I've read some studies that say that they're like 97% air safe in the first month, and then by 3 months they're like 60% air safe. That's a lot of oxygen that's getting in there. Even the 97% is too much. Carboys, I think, are probably down to that 98, 97% after like 3 to 5 months. So carboys are way better for long-term aging.
Just keep an eye on your airlocks.
Yeah, exactly. Pressure fermentation with stainless steel. Stainless steel is the best overall because you can also kill everything with fire. Throw some boiling hot water in it and kill some stuff.
Being on that, having mixed equipments and stuff like that, if you cannot kill it with fire, if you cannot boil your equipment, it is sour only after you've used it for something with Brett.
Yeah, I think that's
just
a really
to be
good rule.
safe.
And that includes glass. Obviously, you can't.
Yeah.
I mean, glass would be able to. It's less porous than plastic, so you'd be able to pour boiling hot liquid in it. But then you also wouldn't have the glass that you poured it into. So
You don't not glass.
We do not
Glass-
recommend that.
in plastics and stainless steels, glass, because it's non-porous, you can use star sand and it's going to kill any bread.
yeah,
as long
if
as
you're
there's
highly
no
concentrated,
scratches.
star sand might do the trick. The star sand does have an intercalating agent. That's something that actually breaks into the cell walls, which makes it better than some other things. It's still not as good as certain halogen sanitizers, but also halogen sanitizers are only good on glass and not non-porous things. And so if you use iodine, you can probably be okay.
Yeah.
But big rule of thumb, try it. What was the first I'm just going to completely go off that topic because I feel like they get it. What was the first mixed culture that you pitched as a homebrewer?
Yeah, so I did. I mean, Ode Bruin, I think, was it was either that or I did like a Belgian double that I wanted to sort of sour and finish with Brett. And I remember pitching, I had fermented originally the Belgian double with a Belgian yeast, like a Trappist yeast, and then pitched
Which one of these was
Brettanomyces
yours?
in as secondary. And it was probably the thing that encouraged me to keep going with mixed fermentation because I gave it another several months and it just picked up this really interesting, it dried out a little more and it picked up this really interesting kind of funk, and I feel like it developed more of those like dark fruit characters, and I really enjoyed how that went. And so there's probably still in my basement some mixed fermentation beer that definitely needs to be dumped down the drain in the yard somewhere. That just
It's incredible.
as I moved into, I don't know, I don't think there's any liquid in those airlocks anymore, but as I moved on to professional brewing, I just sort of forgot about them. But at one point in time, I think I had something like 12 or 13 carboys filled with mixed fermentation beer sitting in my basement. That at that point, it's like a full-time job of like monitoring that stuff. So I might not encourage you to take that deep dive unless you're just planning to open a mixed fermentation brewery.
Get a dedicated carboy. Carboys are less expensive than stainless steel, and then just make a batch of beer, throw a mixer in it, and then see what happens. And be 100% willing to dump it if it doesn't taste good in 6 months.
And you need to
Or
give
a
it
year.
time. You need to give it time. There's a very unique thing that happens in Brett where it will make your beers go flavorless. If your beer dives into flavorless, it was tasting like beer, it's tasting really good. And
Like
then
this is
there's
Guy
nothing-
Fieri's other home that he doesn't even know about.
Yeah.
Flavorlessville.
Flavorlessville. Literally, when everything drops out, there's almost no flavor left. It's like, well, how did my beer get watered down? That is Brett. That is Brett fermenting everything out of it. The sugars, that's Brett fermenting some alcohols. That's just Brett working. And if you give it another, say, 2 to 3 months on that, it's going to pop out with some really good acids, funks, and flavors that's going to be super delicious. It's kind of a unique thing in working in mixed firms. This is kind of like you. When I got into making beer, I realized that, all right, I can make some pretty decent IPAs, but they're going to cost me about the same that I can go buy an IPA for. That $30 bottle of 750 ml sour beer, I can go make for like $3. But
Probably less. The bottle itself might cost $3.
Yeah, okay. See, but that's one of those things. It was cheap to make the sour beers. I got into it really early, but realizing what some of these things do and trying to predict them in the future is the hardest part. Brett does drop flavor. If you have a mix firm that drops flavor, keep it and let it age. These things need time, and especially with specific cultures. I think that's one thing that we missed out on. If you're using Sour Batch Kids from Imperial, works in 6 months. Beautiful, beautiful sour mixed firm beers in 6 months. If you are using Rosalaire, which is one of my favorite blends from Y Yeast, my opinion is years. A year to 2 years before it really starts to hit its stride. From my experience,
have a really good spot to store all these things. Just forget about
it. That's really it. It's the commitment of time. And like you said, even like Rosalaire, I found that like the flavor developed sooner on like another pitch, like as it generationally went on. But then that means you've waited a year for that one beer. Oh, it tastes great. And now it's like another maybe 8 months on the second beer. So now you've made 2 beers in the course of 2 years, which if you're an avid home brewer, you're like, man, I could have brewed like 40 beers. So, if it's your thing to explore that, that's great. But there is that, you kind of have to have patience. There is something about kind of setting it aside and just forgetting about it for a little bit, and definitely tap into like your local genus experts, because there is a point in time too where you're like, if you've given it time and it tastes like feet, or it tastes bad, or it tastes like plastic, a lot of times there's this like thought of like, well, it just needs more time. It may have been that something went wrong, your culture didn't work out, or you had some sort of oxygen ingress, and time is not going to save that beer. And I think that's, like Peter said, you kind of have to also be willing to accept that when you're going to be experimenting with these cultures that have less predictability than something like your good old, London ale yeast, is that you may run into a point where, hey, you brewed a batch and you gave it 8 months and it turned into garbage and there's no saving it. And at this point you have to make that, do you eat the cost of those ingredients and just move on and try another one? I don't encourage like, oh, what if I blended it with this, that? All you're doing is spending more time and more brewing money trying to save a beer that probably isn't savable. So you just kind of have to you have to accept that philosophy and know that like, oh, I might come into some losses, but I might also develop a really awesome beer that can sit around for a while in my cellar. I can share it with my friends over the next few years, and it's going to be delicious.
But if you're willing to spend $30 on a bottle of sour, you could probably make that if you just,
For one bottle of sour, you can just make another batch and try again.
Yeah.
So.
That's literally it. And there is some things to be mentioned on that. Both the 2 beers that we're drinking right now, the Consecration from Russian River, as well as the Insula Mollitus Colibus, which if you miss this from Avery and you like sour beers, I feel bad for you. They're both from 2015. I mean, these beers have aged beautifully and developed wonderfully over all of this time. And once you get a sour program going in your house, it's very easy to pump out beers once a month. But on top of that, you also, going into the throwing away thing, you also have to realize you have to have enough experience. And that does come with knowing somebody who has worked with it long enough to know when things are not savable.
Right.
If you create a whole bunch of baby barf, butyric acid, can you pitch Brett onto that at the right temperature to turn it into dank pineapple? Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the level that's in there. Can you ferment enough of that butyric into the pineapple flavor to take it out of the flavor threshold, or is it always going to be baby barf?
Yeah. And there are things like that where there are compounds that would be identified as off flavors that can be transformed with mixed cultures over time in the right conditions. Parts per million, you may have too much where it's not going to turn into a beautiful thing. And there are some that are like end all be all compounds that can't be broken down anymore. I mean, ethyl acetate is one I come across quite a bit, which is essentially comes across as nail polish, both in flavor and aroma. And it comes from a number of factors in mixed fermentation, but oxygen is definitely a perpetuator there.
A lot of the ones that taste like plastic or fusel alcohols are the ones that just can't be saved.
Yeah, I mean, those are one of those things where if you're smelling nail polish on that beer you left in your basement for 8 months, I have bad news for you.
Put that down the drain. Put it down the drain.
And so, it's not a universal solve of like, oh, well, if I just pitch Brett in it, it'll fix everything. Not always. So, like, before you go spending more time and more money on trying to fix a bad beer, get some feedback, reach out and do some research, and it's probably just as easy for you to try again, maybe change some things, and you'll hopefully get it, and you'll start to learn a little bit about making mixed fermentation beer.
It's not a universal solve, but nail polish is a fairly good solvent.
Yeah, that's true.
Dad jokes.
Use it for cleaning.
Yeah. That was a good one. You made that up. You made that up. I'm going to give that to you. That was a good one. And I'm also going to say, I mean,
so badly.
yeah, Brett, it does solve a lot of things. It does not solve everything, and I will say,
Tim. Brett solves a lot of things.
Do you need Jesus? Try Brett.
With a goat. Yeah. Anyway, but at the same time, I will say there are a lot of commercial examples of wild beers, sour beers, mixed firm beers, especially in the younger breweries out there, that should not be served. There are a lot of professional brewers, professional breweries that are putting out some beers that are solventy, that are way too far into Band-Aid or chlorine, chlorophenols, really.
And you can beat them.
And they put it out because they're so scared to dump that beer down the drain. You spent so much time on it. You put so much work and love into it. I get it. It's really hard to dump something down the drain like that. But it's better. It's so much better to do it. And I don't know. I want to complain about Crush right now because I do a lot. I pick on 10 Barrel Crush, but that's only because 10 Barrel had such an amazing sour program, and then they started pumping out barf. 10 Barrel Crush, and granted, I haven't had it in years. It might be better, but a lot of it was butyric acid, and they're putting it out onto the market, and then consumers are getting tricked into thinking that, sour should taste like barf. No, they shouldn't. That's just a crappy sour. If you have a wild ale that tastes like Band-Aids, that person should not have put it on the market. These beers should taste good. Sorry, that's my soapbox for the day. Mark that off a bingo.
All right, let's go into some questions while we have some time. The first one that I want to address is, have either of you used a Squirrel? No, but we have mentioned that you guys should all email Squirrel and then tell them to send us some so that we can use them.
So that we can use it. Yeah, 100%. Have you seen the Squirrel?
I have, yeah. When it first came out, I remember they were promoting a lot of stuff through CBC, and I thought it was a pretty innovative program, especially for breweries that might be tight on space and not be able to manage a great big barrel program, but it allowed a lot of flexibility, I thought, for a smaller brewery.
Yeah, even home brewers, because
totally.
They go down to the 5 gallons.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So. And the fact that staves are swappable, and you've got it seemed like a cool design. Yeah, you definitely send some to these guys so they can try it out and tell me about it.
100%. Well, and that's one of the deals, to further plug Squirrel, because you should all send them this part of the video. We do have resources
Make a clip.
with people.
There's YouTube clips now.
Yeah. We do have resources with people who have started Foeder programs that we could bring on and further promote the product if it's going to be really great to use for that.
Yeah,
somebody make that a clip.
Spokane is awesome as the collaborative community.
That's true. All right, AI Brew. First live stream I've ever caught. Having a new kid has me up at 3 a.m. First of all, congratulations for having a kid at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And the correct response is to watch Genus Brewing right after that.
Actually, you know what? I had my kid at 1 or 2. My wife did. She went through all the work.
Well,
you know what I did?
You know
what I did? I watched Anthony Bourdain. We had no reservations, playing the whole time, and it was beautiful because we were just watching. My wife finally went into labor around 1 a.m. Well, that's when we had our daughter. And the nurse is like, "Do you want us to turn off the TV?" She's like, "No, leave it on. I'm watching." Anthony Bourdain. So, our child was born to Anthony Bourdain.
And you named her Anthony. That was very...
I respect that so much. It makes me so happy that happened. All right. Anyway, I digress.
All right, so we're down to Patrick Sandy. Do a mixed firm in corny kegs with oak rods at home. You can do that. I don't know if rods would probably be better than chips and stuff like that. But a mixed firm in a corny keg would be good if you already have an extra one, especially if you don't like cleaning it all that much. Because then you can just clean it, like have it once, use it as a vessel, and clean it in 6 months when you actually pour off the beer. Plus, if you do it as a like a cask style where you clip off the dip tube, the liquid side dip tube, you can turn it on its side, age it on its side, and then you can still take small samples out of it just with gravity and natural fermentation.
That's true, yeah. And I mean, when I was doing a lot of homebrew mixed fermentation and I had a successful beer come out, I was leaving the yeast cake behind in the carboy and putting new beer right on top. I mean, you could kind of develop a program that way too. If you wanted to rack, if you had a couple of kegs you wanted to dedicate to sour, you could rack that beer out into another keg for serving and then put a new wort on top of that culture. But if you've got a corny keg to dedicate to mixed fermentation, I think that's probably the perfect vessel. You can allow it to ferment under pressure. It's metal. You can kill it with fire.
You can kill with fire.
Yeah. And it's a great, like, that is the best vessel probably for keeping oxygen ingress out.
Yeah.
And sure, like oaks, I would probably use something that was larger oak as opposed to cubes, because you're going to have so much surface area. You're going to probably over oak your mixed fermentation beer, especially over time.
It doesn't take much to over oak. No. Especially with a high surface. If you're using chips with a high surface area.
Oh yeah. I've
don't like
picked up
chips.
oak in several days from oak chips,
Yeah.
and people were like, "Oh, how long did you age this beer?" 4 days. 4 days on the
That's
oak
it.
chips.
That's
That's
it.
all it took. One more day, it would have been undrinkable. So.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna. Bunky has asked this question that's
Well,
related.
hold on 30 seconds, because I'm going to say, if you're doing mix firm and you're putting it back onto the same yeast cake, do not expect the same beer to come out. Different proportions of the mix firm, the sac, the Brett, and all of the bacterias
It's a live microbiome.
grow and flow over time. So it will always change. Solara will always change too, and that's a good thing as long as you keep it healthy.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what you're into, man. I mean, I found that every time I repitched, the acidity would take either longer to develop or would just come out less, because over time the Brett and the sac culture were sort of taking over. And developing an environment where the acid producing bacteria just wasn't getting the hold as much. So I was getting some funk, but less acidity each time. And I was kind of just buying into that, Then I was like, okay, well, what style could I put on it now that would kind of lean itself to less acidity? But yeah, that's a great point of knowing that if you're continuing to use a culture, even like in a Foeder program, that culture is always changing over time. It's like a little battle going on in there where certain bacteria or certain yeast are consuming the sugars quicker than others and out-competing. So it's going to be a living, breathing thing.
We always start with French Saison, because French Saison is a killer strain and actually is inhibitive to bacteria. That and Brett, because Brett's super strong and just doesn't die very easily. So I think that's kind of a good, like, if you want to make sure you have a guaranteed Solera that's not going to go off the walls, I think those are two good ones to start with.
There's also been several studies about pairing and mixing Brett with certain, particularly Saison strains, of like how they work together, because as Brett continues to ferment, sort of the compounds they create and what it eats is the opposite of like a Saccharomyces strain. So they're really working together. The Saccharomyces is creating stuff for the Brett to feed on later, and you're getting a really like awesome complex. I know Fremont did some studies through like the Master Brewers program about like 50-50 blends and like 75-25 blends of Brett and Saison yeast and what they sort of got out of that.
The Fremont Black Heron series of mix firms are really good, and in my opinion, if you want to get into mix firms when you haven't been drinking them so much, that is a great starter series for you.
Yeah.
They're massively complex without being overly aggressive in any way, and just beautiful drinkable beers.
All right, we took more than 30 seconds. Matt, what was the question?
Sorry.
So you have taken off when you take off a portion of aged beer out of a barrel and then replace it with fresh wort, is there still character and flavor that's still preserved? Which you guys already kind of answered.
Well, kind of.
Yes, there is, because you also got to consider you're not taking out all the beer, so there's still some beer from the last beer. So whatever beer you made, that character is going to be preserved, but you're also building new beer on top of it, which is going to partly come from your wort and partly come from the new culture that's being developed.
Yeah. It's also dependent on how much you're taking out too, because then you're going to offset how much is fresh new sugars for that culture to consume and how much is already more or less fermented beer too. Yeah. So the more you take off, you're probably shifting that culture more significantly. Say if you were to pull off 50% of your Solera versus only 25%.
Esteban, because I love saying your name. Esteban Andrade Z. Hey folks, any advice on how to introduce cucumber to beer? Which style fits better? And actually, I bring this up because one of my Solaris was a cucumber, and it was phenomenal. Introducing cucumber to beer for me is always towards the tail end of fermentation, or if it's in a mixed room sour like this, it's in a secondary fermentation, meaning I will take my primary sour beer into another vessel and throw the cucumber on top of it. If it's in a normal beer, I just throw it in at the tail end of fermentation. If you have like 10 points of gravity left, chuck the fruit in right on top of it. Cucumber is actually much more stronger a flavor than you realize it is. Exactly. Much more strongest. It is a stronger flavor than you realize it is. When you eat cucumber, it's actually kind of diluted out. When you actually put it into things, it's a very strong, sweet flavor. It can go in a plethora of things. I think cucumber can go all over the board. Generally, in a light, refreshing beer is kind of where you're putting it, because cucumber is kind of light and refreshing.
But pickle beers also,
Pickle beer would be amazing. Absolutely amazing. Well, actually, put it in a Gosa, and then you'll have something like a pickle beer.
Or is it Urban Artifact that does a beer called Pickle? I think, and it is.
I haven't tried that one.
You should.
We have a homebrewer that's made 2 or 3 so far, and he's about to make his next pickle beer pretty soon. I convinced him to make a pickle beer because I didn't want to do it.
And it's amazing.
It was really good, and so now he's made it like 4 times.
It is so good, actually. It is so good.
I mean, speaking to the intensity, I remember in my time at Iron Goat, we made I think it was a Goza, but we made a watermelon cucumber beer. And it was like ratio of cucumber to watermelon. I think we used like 7 times in terms of weight more watermelon than cucumber, just to like be able to pick up the watermelon character, because the cucumber, and also the watermelon peel, like a little bit of the rind, has a cucumber-like flavor as well. So it was sort of working against those. Yeah, so like it was very cucumbery to start. We ended up adding more watermelon flesh just to bring that through, and we did not use very much cucumber. So it is a lot stronger than you think.
Yeah, Joe had a pretty good success with it. This is cucumber cream ale that he used to do.
That was so good. He hated. I mean, I understand hating to make a beer, but he hated it. And it was so good.
It was a very refreshing. I mean, there's something to be said for. Do you normally have wild rabbits in this area? Or?
Yes. Yeah. Did he just run out in front?
Yeah,
there he is.
Right there.
Yeah, we've been trying to catch that one. Sky wants to save him and take him home.
All right. Hey, there's always something exciting here on the live stream. Wild animals.
All right.
I'm gonna real get a question in here real quick. Is what brand of brewing equipment do you use, Adam?
At Garland Brewworks, I'm assuming.
You're welcome.
We got. I'm actually very fortunate. We have brand new equipment, which was a new thing for me. Starting at the brewery, we got it all through Sungood, a company out of China. So I have all China stainless steel, a brew house, and all of our fermenters and our serving tanks that we use as well.
Before anybody gets on to that, honestly, if you're buying a stout tank, you're buying China steel. There's a lot of that goes through it. He's just going to a direct supplier instead of through a middleman on it.
It would have been. There are several companies, in the United States that do make equipment. We're actually, I think there's still some very close to us over in Idaho that do it. Would have been great. It's very cost prohibitive, unfortunately. Still, we were able to build an entire brewery, including fermenters, serving tanks, my brew house, for the price of probably a couple of tanks I could have gotten American made. So I'm sorry.
Well, you're using serving tanks.
I mean,
we are, So we have a long draw system. We actually weren't able to, the way our tap room is designed, to do the old taps right through the wall from our cooler. So we have a long draw system, and actually all our beer that's being served comes out of serving tanks. Most of it, we do have some kegs, but goes down into our basement, travels about 30 to 35 feet through the basement, and then up a few more feet up to the taps. So, yeah.
That's cool. A company called Blewett Brewing Company in Leavenworth does
I love Blewett.
something similar, and they are really, really good.
Cool.
Yeah,
that was something, knowing other breweries in town like Perry Street that does serving tanks. For me, having worked in a brewery for 5 or 6 years now, cleaning one vessel versus cleaning, 30 tanks or 30 kegs was definitely a plus.
Yeah. Here's a good question. Peter, I'm visiting you next month. Have you locked down that Kegland exclusive Northwest hookup? No, but maybe. You should keep commenting on Kegland videos and tell them to send us some stuff. But we're down to, they already commented and they want to send us some stuff, but we just got to make that the connection between me and Key happen.
All right, this one's actually relevant. Dave Dempster.
That's relevant.
Yeah, it was. But I mean, to mix firm. Dave Dempster. Did my first mix firm recently. Saison yeast and added 2 kilograms of rhubarb. Moved it to a small barrel that has been used a bunch, so not adding a lot of character, but pitched Brett C. How long for aging? Rhubarb was removed before barrel aging. This is actually a very interesting thing, and I want to throw it out there because you probably didn't realize which type
that is key.
of Brett C.
Cerveza is key here from Kegland. Perfect. So was it? No, okay.
Yeah. So, yes, when you get here, we're going to lock it down. But which Brett C? Actually, Brett Clausinaceae, which is what you're talking about, Brett C. There are many different forms of that. And depending on who you get it from, it might actually be a different form of Brett C than other forms of Brett C. So, talking about mixed firms and just something like this, you probably didn't realize. You buy a Brett C from someone and expect it to be Clausinaceae, same across the boards. I think, we've identified 8-10 different strains of C now. Brux is huge.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
So
on
many
a
different
on a
Bruxes.
genetic level, if you're actually doing that, I mean, it is pretty surprising that the genetic variants that can occur between a single strain of yeast
Yeah.
or bacteria.
So that's a variable question on which one you got on there.
No,
Clausinaceae
he's
does
just
actually tend to happen fast. That is one of the more quicker developing Bretts out there. Give it at least 6 months. Taste it after that. If you don't feel that it's at the flavor content that you want, give it another 2 to 3 months and taste it after that and see where it's going. When it's tasting good, bottle it.
I don't know what the setup is on your barrel if you happen to have a Vinny nail or something. I always put Vinny nails even in my little 5-gallon barrels just so I could pull a sample. If you don't have a way of pulling a sample without really, introducing more oxygen, I would definitely recommend just erring on the side of giving several months before you pull a sample so that you're not necessarily putting your beer at risk. But kind of a rule of thumb that we had at Iron Goat for beers that we had pitched, like say Brett in that had already fermented at least primarily with sack, was to note the gravity at the time of pitching Brett, give it time, and then we typically looked anywhere from like 14 to 21 days between gravity readings to see if there was a plateau. If we finally hit, and typically with Brett, I mean, with given enough time, you're going to get very low to like 0 as far as gravity goes, depending on the Brett strain and how much remaining sugars were. But so it is definitely a matter of taste and like, hey, if this is tasting good, I mean, especially if you're throwing it in a keg, throw it in that keg and serve it. But also just looking for a gravity stability, because eventually even Brett will run out of food to eat and it will finish fermenting. So looking also for that, at least on a professional side, that's always that, making sure that the gravity is no longer dropping. Brett's a lot slower. If it were just sack, I would look at 24 to 48 hours if there's no more gravity drop. But giving it more time with Brett, knowing that it moves slower, would be another indicator to let you know if it's finished, right?
And it depends on what flavors you're looking for and then what temperatures you're working at.
Right.
Brett generally creates more funk at cooler temperatures and more acid at higher temperatures. So whatever temperature your brew house is at, where it's fermenting, and then if you're looking for more funk or if you're looking for more acid.
And with it being in a barrel too, I mean, there's also just, you could develop flavors through that micro-oxygenation over time too. It might be done fermenting, but maybe there's something to be said for aging it a little longer too in the barrel.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah.
So when it's tasting good,
Yeah,
do it.
drink it.
Actually, I want to hit on this. You said it, a Vinny nail. Vinny nail is, we call it a Vinny nail because Vinny Clarizo from Russian River, he was one of the guys who really popularized this, if not invented it, taking a titanium or a non-reactive metal nail, which is usually stainless or titanium. They're just expensive on titanium, so stainless is used. Putting it in towards the bottom of your barrel.
on the head,
On
if
the
you're
head of
storing
the
your
barrel.
barrel on its
The round circular part of the barrel. You put a nail in there because they're aging on their side. So you can pull the nail out, pull a sample off of it, and put the nail back in, getting nice, good beer from the center of the brew without adding any extra oxygens or infection.
Yeah,
cells.
assuming your barrel's like sealed and there's at least some very semblance of positive pressure in there. a little stream of beer runs out enough in your sample glass that you can taste it. Then you reinsert the nail. The oak swells around it, so once the nail's inside, it's not leaking anymore. But it's a nice way, rather than having to like pop a bung off and try and stick like a racking cane or some sort of wine thief inside, where you're exposing that top of the beer to oxygen. It's a nice way to at least pull a sample.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a sour, and that's a West Coast IPA.
Yes.
So it's up to you. Both. Blend them.
Speaking of blending, I mean, Adam, are you running out of time? I'm down to keep going until somebody comes in.
If people have,
Somebody comes in, yeah.
questions, I'm happy to answer them.
This is actually a good one from Adam Chumbley. I'm like at the top reading that right now. Adam, what are your best techniques for head retention in your traditional beers? Built into malts and percentages or more process? And this is actually kind of a weird thing because acids are supposed to help in head retention, but the way you do mixed ferms actually kind of destroys head.
True. Yeah, and there's a lot to be said for, especially with very like lactic acid heavy beers. You'll see that when they pour, they have this great foamy head and it disappears within seconds.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times those acids break down over time those protein chains that help develop great head retention. Brett tends to kind of go the other way. At least we saw like in our first that really light foamy. Beer, and a lot of that just comes from the re-fermentation in the bottle. But there's like this really interesting thing that happens with Brett and the way that it sort of consumes certain things and produces other things, that you typically will get that where you can almost scoop it with a spoon on a lot of like Brett fermented saisons, or even if you think about like Orval that's bottle conditioned with Brett, and you get that foam that's just like you're shaking it out of the bottle like ketchup on the beer, which is great. So for me, my approach with most mixed fermentation beers, if I wanted to have as much body and as head retention as I could maintained in the beer when it was finished, I just try to create as much protein and long chain sugars in the initial wort as possible. It's going to get broken down over time, but the more you can retain in the finished product, I think you'll find that. I was usually doing very heavy wheat, grists that were high in wheat, mashing at very high temperatures. I mean, it's sort of the principle of, we mentioned a turbid mash earlier on, of sort of like creating just this like chalky, milky wheat juice that you're going to ferment with bacteria and yeast, because over time, at least some of those long chain sugars and proteins might be left behind to give you a little bit of a body impression and some head retention.
And also all of those big long chain sugars, all those proteins and everything like that are very helpful for the bacterias, and especially Brettanomyces, to munch and eat and do things with over time. So that is something you should be adding in. If you let any Brett beer sit over time, it'll create large head that will dissipate very quickly. The younger that it is, it will probably last a little bit longer. If you have lactic acid producing bacteria, generally it's going to fall quicker than if it's just a sack and a Brett. But do it through your malts and your process. All right, there was a good one in there. Sydney Husky. I assume the evaporation rate will be reduced the larger the vessel. Talking about foeders, barrels, and stuff like that.
Not necessarily, but sort of. So that's going to depend more on what the shape of the vessel is than what the size of the vessel is. So let's say it is a large vessel that is very flat, then the evaporation rate is going to be much higher. If it's a large vessel that is very tall or round or something to that effect, then the evaporation rate is going to be lower.
Yeah, and in fact, with foeders, you'll see a lot of different designs. Some look like barrels that are tipped on their side, just gigantic. The one that we had at Iron Goat was sort of a vertical oriented, so it was tall, almost like a barrel up on its head. And we did actually experience quite a bit of evaporation even in that one, because the surface area of the beer had been spread across basically the diameter of the vessel. They do make foeders that are tipped on their side, which when full have much less like surface area for both oxygen contact and that sort of that evaporation note. So
the more like a sphere it looks like, the less the evaporation. The less like a sphere it looks like, the more the evaporation.
It's all about surface area on that. So yes and no. If there's more surface area because of a foeder, you can have a higher evaporation rate. If there's less surface area, then no. So yeah, it's both.
Real quick, while we have 81 people on here, before we continue, do you want to plug your? Do you have social media you want to plug?
Sure. You can find Garland Brewworks, the current brewery I'm working at. I think we're just Garland at Garland Brewworks on Instagram
I'm finding it right now.
and Facebook. I have a personal account, which I typically, it's all fermentation based. So if it's not beer stuff, it's I also ferment food, and I'm a big baker as well and do a lot of sourdough baking. But I'm just Boyd the Beer Guy at Boyd the Beer Guy.
We should have worked with you
well,
on the Patrick Sandy collab.
Well, if you're doing Grain Shed, you're not going to find better beer within 300 miles of here, or better bread. I mean, they're fantastic, and I'm not that advanced where I'm weighing out the wood I'm using that I'm going to burn in my. Those guys are. If you want to talk about
nutty.
nerding out on bread, like that's my
people.
temple that I go to pray at. So
Yeah. That's, I mean, very accurate. That is a place
it's a
you should
bread
go
temple.
to do it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Adam Tremblay again. Can you briefly explain how you take care of these barrels and foeders to keep them for decades?
Yeah, that's a great question because we haven't really talked about maintenance. But I was very fortunate at Iron Goat. We typically would, anytime we got barrels in, we would order barrels typically in mass from either wineries, or we did a lot of spirit barrel aging as well. But for our mixed fermentation program, if it was going into a barrel, it was previously a wine barrel. And we would typically treat those barrels when they first came in. We would swell them. Initially, it was with hot water from our hot liquor tank, which was coming in about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and we would fill them at least halfway, where there would be enough steam generated to at least steam the top of the barrel. And we typically let those sit overnight. We would also soak the heads a lot of times as well. So we tip the barrel up on its side and just put enough hot water on the top to basically create about an inch or so of water, and allow that, because the heads also are a great leaking point where the staves come together with the heads. We would pull the nails on the metal bands around the nails, and then we had special cooperage tools where we'd knock the bands in towards the center of the barrel to sort of tighten them up before we swirl them. That actually is helpful too. Especially, it really depended on how long the barrel had been sitting without liquid in it. I mean, there were some times where barrels would come in and you could see through the staves from like the top. You could see the floor, and that I typically knew at that point that barrel was going to need a lot of work if we were ever to get it to swell back up, which typically we did. It was very rare when I couldn't get a barrel to stop leaking. It just meant I spent a lot more time and probably several days of like swelling the beer with either hot water, or eventually we got a steamer, which was just like an industrial steamer for creating a lot of steam for like steaming floors or adding steam to sanitize or clean something. We had a special attachment that was basically like a kind of like a dip tube or a spear that you might put down inside a barrel with lots of little holes all the way down, and it would fill the entire barrel with basically 350 degree steam coming into the barrel, and you'd run that for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And some of the barrels, if they weren't in great condition, you would see it was like a cartoon, like steam would be shooting out of all the cracks in the heads. But over time, that would dissipate, and the wood is very good at absorbing, especially at high temperatures, that moisture and swelling. So that was usually the first pass, was kind of like tightening up the barrels, swelling them. I mean, not only does the steam swell them up, but it helps to at least sanitize at least a little bit the surface area. There's been some studies and tests that have shown that Brett can even survive like something like 4 millimeters into the oak itself. So
it works in there.
Yeah, I mean,
It
if you're
eats
really
moisture.
trying to like take a barrel and eliminate any culture that's in it, for like a lot of the larger barrel houses, they have ozone machines that will fill the barrel with ozone, which basically kills anything, and it permeates the wood when it's put in under pressure as well. But that's an expensive device to invest in.
Perichloric acid.